Greetings. This is knowledge time. Welcome, alchemists. Today I'll be reading from the book "The Laws of Human Nature" by Robert Greene. Currently, I am reading from chapter 4, and this is going to be part 2. And it begins: Keys to Human Nature. For thousands of years, we humans believed in fate, some kind of force, spirits, gods, or God compelled us to act in a certain way. At birth, our entire lives we laid out in advance. We were fated to succeed or fail. We see the world much differently now. We believe that we are largely in control of what happens to us, that we create our own destiny. Upon occasion, however, we might have a fleeting sensation that approximates what our ancestors must have felt. Perhaps a personal relationship goes bad or our career path hits a snag. And these difficulties are uncannily similar to something that happened to us in the past. Or we realize that our way of working on a project needs some improvement. We could do things better. We try to alter our methods, only to find ourselves doing things in exactly the same way, with nearly the same results. We might feel for a moment that some kind of mag, mag, magellan, Magellan, Magellan force in the world, some curse, compels us to relieve the same situations. We can often notice the phenomenon more clearly in the action of others, particularly those closest to us. For instance, we see friends continually fall for exactly the wrong person or unconsciously push away the right person. We cringe at some foolish behavior of theirs, such as an ill-considered investment or career choice, only to see them repeat the foolishness a few years later. Once they have forgotten the lesson, or we know someone who always manages to offend the wrong person at the wrong time, creating hostility wherever he or she goes, or they crumble under pressure, always in the same way, but blaming others or bad luck for what happens. And of course, we know the addicts who get out of their addiction only to fall back in or find some other form of addiction. We see these patterns and they don't, because nobody likes to believe that they are operating, under some kind of compulsion beyond their control. It is too disturbing a thought. If we are honest with ourselves, we must admit there is some truth to the concept of faith. We are prone to repeat the same decisions and methods of dealing with problems. There is a pattern to our life, particularly visible in our mistakes and failures, but there is a different way of looking at this concept. It is not spirits or gods that control us, but rather our character. The etymology of the word character from the ancient Greek refers to an engraving or stamping instrument. Character, then, is something that is deeply ingrained or stamped within us, that it compels us to act in certain ways beyond our awareness and control. We conceive of this character as having three essential components, each layered on top of the other, giving this character depth. The earliest and deepest layers comes from genetics, from the particular way our brains are wired, which predisposes us towards certain moods and preferences. This genetic component can make some people prone to depression. For instance, it makes some people introverts and others extroverts. It might even incline some toward becoming especially greedy for attention or privilege or possessions. The psychoanalyst Melaine, Melaine Klein, who studied infants, believed that the greedy and grasping type of child came into the world predisposed toward this character trait. There might be other genetic factors as well that predispose us toward hostility or anxiety or openness. A second layer, which forms above this, comes from our earliest years and from the particular type of attachments we form with our mother and caregivers. In these first 3 or 4 years, our brains are especially malleable. We experience emotions much more intensely, creating memory tracks that are much deeper than anything that will follow. In this period of life, we are at our most susceptible to the influence of others, and the stamp from these years is profound. John Bowlby, an anthropologist and psychoanalyst, studied patterns of attachment between mothers and children and came up with four basic schemes: free slash autonomous, dismissing, enmeshed, ambivalent, and disorganized. The free slash autonomous stamp comes from mothers who give their children freedom to discover themselves and to continue and are continually sensitive to their needs but also protects them. Dismissing mothers are often distant, even sometimes hostile and rejecting. Such children are stamped with a feeling of abandonment and the idea that they must continually fend for themselves. The enmeshed ambivalent mothers are not consistent with their attention, sometimes suffocating and over-involved, other times retreating because of their own problems or anxieties. They can make their children feel as if they have to take care of the person who should be taking care of them. Disorganized mothers send highly conflicting signals to their children, reflecting their own inner chaos and perhaps early emotional traumas. Nothing their children do is right, and such children can develop powerful emotional problems. There are, of course, many gradations within each and combinations of them, but in every case, the quality of attachment that we had in our earliest years will create deep tendencies within us, in particular, the way we use relationships to handle or modulate our stress. For instance, children of the dismissing parent will tend to avoid any kind of negative emotional situation and wall themselves off from feelings of dependency. Damn, sounds like my mom. Dismissing. Oh. They might find it harder to commit to a relationship or will unconsciously push people away. The children of the unmeshed variety will experience a great deal of anxiety in relationships and will feel many conflicting emotions. They will always be ambivalent toward people, and this will set noticeable patterns in their life in which they pursue people and then unconsciously retreat. In general, from these earlier years, people will display a particular tone to their character: hostile and aggressive, secure and confident, anxious and avoidant, needy and enmeshing. These two layers are so deep that we have no real conscious awareness of them and the behavior they compel, unless we expend great effort in examining ourselves. Above this, a third layer will form from our habits and experiences as we get older. Based on the first two layers, we will tend to rely on certain strategies for dealing with stress, looking for pleasure, or handling people. These strategies now become habits that are set in our youth. There will be modifications to the particular nature of our character depending on the people we deal with: friends, teachers, romantic partners, and how they respond to us. But in general, these three layers will establish certain noticeable patterns. We will make a particular decision. This is engraved in our brains neurologically. We are compelled to repeat this because the path is already laid. It becomes a habit, and our character is formed out of these thousands of habits, the earliest ones set well before we could be conscious of them. There is a fourth layer as well. It often is developed in late childhood and adolescence as people become aware of their character flaws. They do what they can to cover them up. If they sense that deep inside they are an anxious, timid type of person, they come to realize that this is not a socially acceptable trait. They learn to disguise it with the front. They compensate by trying to appear outgoing or carefree or even domineering. This makes it all the more difficult for us to determine the nature of their character. Some character traits can be positive and reflect inner strength. For instance, some people have a propensity toward being generous and open, empathetic, and resilient under pressure. But these stronger, more flexible qualities often require awareness and practice to truly become habits that can be relied upon. As we get older, life tends to weaken us. Our empathy is harder to hold on to. See chapter 2. If we are reflectively generous and open to everyone we meet, we can end up in a lot of trouble. Confidence without self-awareness and control can be grandiose. Without conscious effort, these strengths will tend to wear down or turn into weaknesses. What this means is that the weakest parts of our character are the ones that create habits and compulsive behavior because they do not require effort or practice to maintain. Finally, we can develop conflicting character traits, perhaps stemming from a difference between our genetic predispositions and our earliest influences, or from parents who stamp in us different values. We might feel both idealistically and materialistic, the two parts fighting within us. The law remains the same. The conflicted character which is developed in the earliest years will merely reveal a different kind of pattern, with decisions that tend to reflect a person's ambivalence or that swing back and forth. As a student of human nature, your task is twofold. First, you must come to understand your own character, examining as best you can the elements in your past that have gone into forming it, and the patterns, mostly negative, that can see recurring in your life. It is impossible to get rid of the stamp that constitutes your character. It is too deep. But through awareness, you can learn to mitigate or stop certain negative patterns. You can work to transform the negative and weak aspects of your character into actual strengths. You can try to create new habits and patterns that go with them through practice, actively shaping your character and the destiny that goes with it. For more on this, see the last section of this chapter. Second, you must develop your skill in reading the character of the people you deal with. You do so. To do so, you must consider character as a primary value when it comes to choosing a person to work for or with or an intimate partner. This means giving it more value than their charm, intelligence, or reputation. The ability to observe people's characters as seen in their actions and patterns is an absolutely critical social skill. It can help you avoid precisely those kinds of decisions that can spell years of misery. Choosing an incompetent leader, a shady partner, a scheming assistant, or the kind of incapable spouse who can poison your life. But it is a skill you must consciously develop because we humans are generally inept when it comes to such assessments. The general source of our ineptness is that we tend to base our judgments of people on what is most apparent. But as stated earlier, people often try to cover up their weaknesses by presenting them as something positive. We see them brimming with self-confidence only to later discover that they are actually arrogant and incapable of listening. They seem frank and sincere, but over time we realize that they are actually boorish and unable to consider the feelings of others. Or they seem prudent and thoughtful, but eventually we see that they are in fact timid in their core and afraid of the slightest criticism. People can be quite adept as creating these optical illusions, and we fall for them. Similarly, people will charm and flatter us and blinded by our desire to like them. We fail to look deeper and see the character flaws. Related to this, when we look at people, we often are really seeing only their reputation, the myth that surrounds them, the position they occupy, and not the individual. We come to believe that a person who has success must by nature be generous, intelligent, and good, and that they deserve everything they have gotten. But successful people come in all shapes. Some are good at using others to get where they have gotten, masking their own incompetence. Some are completely manipulative. Successful people have just as many character flaws as anyone else. Also, we tend to believe that someone who adheres to a particular religion or political belief system or moral code must have the character to go with this. But people bring the character they have to the positions they occupy or to the religion they practice. A person can be a progressive, liberal, or a loving Christian and still be an intolerant tyrant at heart. The first step, then, in studying character is to be aware of these illusions and facades and to train ourselves to look through them. We must scrutinize everybody for signs of their character, no matter the appearance they present or the position they occupy. With this firmly in mind, we can then work on several key components to the skill. Recognizing certain signs that people admit in certain situations and that clearly reveal their character. Understanding some general categories that people fit into, strong versus weak character, for instance. And finally, being aware of certain types of characters that often are the most toxic and should be avoided if possible. So that's part 2 of chapter 5. Tomorrow I'll be reading part 3, chapter 4. And it is character signs. In closing, subscribe to the channel, comment any questions you have, like if the information was inspiring for you, and share this knowledge with other alchemists. Also, you can follow me on Instagram for more progressive knowledge. So you can find me at Max_Bugatti_8008. I'm all about family first. I'm an investor in stocks and alternative energy. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an aerospace botanist. I have a confidence building program. If you want to purchase that or get into it or learn more information, inbox me. And I'm currently out here in San Francisco, California. While you're slaying dragons, I'll be taming them.